Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Have you ever watched somebody do something and it was really hard for you to enjoy it for what it was because you really wish that you were the one doing it? And maybe it was, being at a rock concert. Maybe it was at a sporting event. Maybe it was even something like watching people play role-playing games on YouTube. And maybe it wasn't actually observing the process, but seeing something that somebody had made. And maybe like a crafts person that makes pottery and was selling it at a show. Whatever it happened to be, you had this feeling that like, well, I belong there. That's what I should be doing. And maybe even looked at it and said, well, gosh, I can kind of do this a little bit better. I've certainly had that experience. As a kid, I always wanted to be a rock musician. I remember listening to rock music, watching the shows, and I wanted to be the person making that stuff. It wasn't just about, being on stage. Well, that might have been part of it, but I didn't want to just be a consumer. That stuff was so awesome. I wanted to be the one creating it. And later on I discovered I like role-playing games and what have you. I put these passions of mine down and I suffered the consequences. I always felt that ache, that longing to go back and participate in those things again. I'll never forget, guys, in my first band, we'd broken up, and we broke up because of real life. We went on to college and had kids and all the stuff that you do, and got this other bass player. And they started playing in this different band, and I was watching or listening to the recording of them, and it was good. It was really good, and I had this sinking feeling in my gut. Even though it was awesome, I couldn't enjoy it. And it's a terrible example, but it was almost like watching somebody make love to your ex and saying, wow, this is really good, too. They're doing a good job with it. Isn't that awful? But you know what I mean? I had that kind of feeling like, man, I should be participating in this, and I wasn't doing anything like that at the time. And I remember too, like during my church phase, I got involved for a little while in this worship band, and I remember the pastor asking me, "Well, would this satisfy your urge to make music?" And no, it really wasn't exactly what I wanted to be doing. Different story, but it just wasn't scratching the itch. Now, did some research on this, and it's amazing, like the pages and pages of data and research on this phenomenon, and the amount of terms, which I will not list here, is gargantuan. In terms of people like having that feeling of wanting to be there, wanting to be the one that doing it, missing that activity, the longing, if you will. And it's not always just a negative emotion. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of terms like stage envy and what have you that really are a little bit more negative. The green-eyed monster, I believe that Shakespeare called it, where it's definitely more of a feeling of envy than it is of a personal longing to go do the thing. You're jealous of the other person. But I'm not talking about that. There are some great terms like restless creativity, which I think is more apt, which what I was feeling is I had this creativity bottled up inside me, and I wasn't actually acting on it. And so I just had that feeling of restlessness. Or another one is unperformed impulse. That's another great term. This idea of this restless energy of wanting to do something but being unable to do it at that time. Or participation hunger. That's another great one. Or stage ish for performers, where I want to be up there and doing that thing. And apparently, what this great quote I found was like that a lot of performers, feel that way. Many artists feel that way, that they simply feel more alive on stage than when they're in the crowd watching as a participant. And you would say that for like any kind of creator. And it doesn't matter what kind of creation you're doing, what kind of craftsperson you are, if you will. When you're not doing the thing, you have that you don't feel as alive. And you feel more alive when you're actually participating in your passion, in your calling, whatever you want to call it. If you're not doing that, you suffer for it. And I've said this a bunch of times lately, but if you have passions, don't put them down. Even if you have to scale back or something like that during a busy time of life, don't put them down entirely, because from experience, I felt that, and I felt that kind of really restless, gnawing hunger and feeling of being unfulfilled and restlessness. Did I say restless twice? Doesn't matter. You get the idea, and that's a real phenomenon. And so if you put passions down, don't do it, or pick them back up. And if there's a thing that you want to try, that you feel like this might be it's kind of interesting, go try it. However, I'll give you the caveat that, sometimes these impulses might just be, for me, it might be a little ADHD, and shiny object syndrome. And sometimes I watch something for a while. I remember two great examples. Somehow I got in my head decades ago, that those dirt bike, people that do all these tricks. Wow, that looks really cool. I'd love to try that. And also there was like kayaking, the playboats, the whitewater rafting kayaking. I think that looks kind of neat. And then I had to, wait for a while, see if that desire stayed. And, there was that moment of realizing that I would get hurt getting on the bike before I turned it on and did anything else. And so it wasn't really the thing that was going to be for me, or the kayak, I would probably drown and hit my head on a rock and what have you. It looked kind of cool, but, it's not where I want to focus my energy, if you will. But there's a difference between that and like this real vicarious longing, another great term, or craftsman's ache. I love all the stuff that came up when I was researching this stuff. And there is that definite ache and this vicarious longing I need to be doing the thing. And it's to the point where it kind of hurts when you watch somebody else doing it. Even to this day, even though I'm participating in a lot of music, sometimes I'll watch a band. I still have that itch, like that I really would rather be up on stage. Not all the time, but it can happen. So, I guess if there's any takeaway from this, if you have that experience, take the steps necessary to get back and participate in the things that you love, because that's what makes life worthwhile. It's not doing all the drudgery and going back and forth to work and all that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff is necessary, but it's not what life is all about. When we were kids, we didn't fantasize about doing all the drudgery. We fantasized about doing these things we really loved and enjoyed. And so now this is the real life. This is now. We need to be doing those things, or we're going to be feeling that unfulfilled potential, that unperformed impulse and restless creativity, especially if you're somebody that is creative. And not everybody is, which is another interesting part of research, which I won't get into. But if you have that creativity, that hunger to create, perform, make the thing, it's not just enough to say, read the cool book. I want to write a cool book. Go out there and do it. Take the steps necessary, and feed your soul. You know what I mean? What do you think?